Okay, back in December, we met with Megan Van Gorder, Dr. Megan Van Gorder from Governor State University. I think she got in touch with us through Larry McClellan. She was interested in, the Underground Railroad activities that we had been studying, and so we invited her to come over to the museum. We kinda showed her around there, and then, we adjourned that meeting and went over to the library where there was heat, and met with her there. And Ryan gave her just a load of information and maps on put it on a thumb drive, I believe, and she was really impressed with what she got from Crete Area Historical Society.
I mean, about the Underground Railroad.
Right. Yeah, cause even at that point, you were thinking that we might have a couple more sites that we need to investigate a little bit more, so, that's how we got in touch with Megan Van Gorder. And the connection between Governor State and us, I think, is really something that we wanna try to cultivate there, because they got a history department, they're a university, they've got assets and, things that they can do that we can't, and we may be able to get some interns to help us with some of our work, and that would help them, it would help us. So that was, I thought that was a breakthrough for us to get in contact with them, so, as a result of that, Governor State was gonna have a History Collective Summer Teacher Conference in June. 17th, 18th, and 19th, I believe, was the dates. So I signed up to go to that, and they also said that they would have a place for speakers to talk about history, and, so I said, yeah, I got some stuff I'd like to talk about with the history of our immediate area, because mostly the schools don't teach stuff about local history, they teach world history and things like that, and to find out a little bit of, what are you guys laughing about over there? I'm a teacher here, so I'm gonna keep an eye on it. So anyhow, we wanna get something to share with these people that are gonna be there. They moved the event from 3 days down to 1 day. So I said, well, I've got a presentation, I applied to present, and with the shortening of the thing, I applied to present a abbreviated version of what I wanted to talk about, so, they said, well, yeah, we'll have you come in and talk, so I'm gonna do an abbreviated version of what I don't know what I'm gonna talk about yet. You guys are the dry run here tonight, and since we were kinda in a quandary to have a speaker here, I thought I'd like to try giving this presentation here and see what we can tell people about the early history here. They asked for a name of what the topic was gonna be. So when I first asked about doing this, I said, I would call the topic, how did we get here and when did it start? And then after I thought about that, I said I should have called it something else. That's kind of not exciting. So when this thing got shortened, I thought, I'm gonna change the name of it here. So I changed it to another nondescript name of Parallel Pioneers. So I'll explain that to you here in a second. But so I came up with that, and the topic would be the time period between 1800 and 1900. Most of it's right in the middle of that century. So the parallel pioneers I want to talk about is Willard Wood and Diantha Wood, and then Gurdon Hubbard. They both were instrumental in this area here. I'll start with Gurdon Hubbard. He grew up in Connecticut, I believe. Is that right, Mike?
Born, yeah.
Born in Connecticut in 1802, and just a young kid, lived with his parents. His name was Gurdon Saltonstall Hubbard. His middle name was taken from the pastor at one of their churches or something. They used his last name as Gurdon's middle name. I'm getting all this stuff out of a book about Gurdon Hubbard called Swift Walker. Mike's more of an expert on Gurdon Hubbard than I am, I think. But so, I'll just say right now, if you have any things that you hear me say that I need to expand on or correct or delete, raise your hand and tell me, because this is the first time I'm doing this presentation. I just want to make it interesting so teachers can go to their classes and give them something to think about besides you know, somebody over in Greece or, you know, the Genghis Khan or somebody like that. Who cares about that when you're trying to get local history? So anyhow, Gurdon Hubbard grew up in the East, and as a young kid, he was always interested in being outdoors and whatnot, and he wanted to get into later on, you know, when he gets to be an older guy, like 13, he wanted to work with the fur traders and stuff. So his dad was practiced law, and they were having a hard time making ends meet, so his dad decided to move to Montreal and set up a practice there. Well, he gets to Montreal, well, you gotta be a Canadian lawyer to do practice in Canada, and he didn't have that, so he had to, you know, get his certifications and everything, but, you know, Gurdon went with him, and, as any father would do, tries to get his son a vocation, and got him set up with, some fur trading outfit to work. And so by this time, he's almost 15, and, so he worked at, a place where it was kind of a supply depot for the fur trader industry, and how these people needed supplies and stuff to go out and live in the woods or in the rivers and the boats and do fur trading and fur trapping. So he worked in this, let's call it a hardware store or a supply house, and he was a pretty sharp guy, because he was reading books. His dad had him read books about some of the different explorers that had come earlier than 1800, and he was interested in that. There was a guy, one of his company's customers, this guy owned that business, and so he was quite interested in wanting to talk to this guy. I can't remember the guy's name. I'm not gonna try to guess who it was, but he was able to make contacts working in the supply house to talk with these people and find a little bit more about what they do when they're out on their journeys. So one day he had to make an excursion and deliver some goods to another place or a city on a port, and he got to go and see all the activity around a seaport, or you know, a big lake in the middle of Canada, where all these guys were gearing up to go on these trips with these boats that they would load by hand. These were Mackinacs or Mackinaws, I forget how they pronounce it, but it was these birch bark boats that these guys would load up with tons of supplies, and these guys all in their gear and stuff, their stocking caps with red hats, and just, these were the voyagers. And they'd get out there and take these trips, and there'd be one larger boat that would lead them all, and they'd have to go down the river or down the lake, wherever they were going, probably lakes to get to rivers, rivers to get to lakes. And then they'd have to portage their stuff across land to get to the next body of water. Sometimes they'd have to haul their goods over 6 miles of land to get they'd have to haul their boats and all the cargo and portage over to another body of water that they could continue their trip. And so, man, these guys were some real rugged individuals that were doing this work. And Gurdon was infatuated with doing that. So he finally got to where he got hired on as I think it was a captain's mate on one of these boats, or some, you know, entry-level thing, because he said, I'm almost 16. The guy says, come back when you're almost 18. You know, but he was pretty good sized stature kid and strong. I mean, he would tote barrels full of nails around in the hardware store and supply house, so he was getting a workout. His pay for doing this work, he got bored. He got to stay at the place he worked at. He'd have to sleep on the counter of his store. That was his accommodations that he had. You know, he got paid a little bit, and every once in a while some guy would come along and give him a nice tip that helped him along there, but it was the life he wanted, to deal with these guys. I mean, these were some rugged individuals that lived out in the woods and on boats and traveled Lake Michigan and stuff. So anyhow, he ended up getting to go on one of these excursions up to Mackinac Island with these big birch bark canoes and boats. And when they'd have these, I don't know if it would be called a rendezvous, that's what they call them today, when all these Voyager types get together and reenact and everything there. But it was a rendezvous up on Mackinac Island. They had 4,000 people up there. And it was a real raucous crowd. and just an awful lot of activity going on there, and he just ate that up. He met another young kid that was about his age named Kinsey. You probably have heard the Kinsey name. They're one of the primary families in Chicago way back in the early days. So Gordon Hubbard latched onto that, and he traveled back and forth. They would go to Mackinac, I don't know how they pronounce it there. But that's what the boats were called, but they also call that island almost the same word. They'd go back and forth along the coast of Michigan and haul these goods up and down the rivers and trade goods to the Indians for their furs, because it was the American Fur Trading Company that he worked for. And so that was a big market for furs in Europe. So that was big business. And it's kind of funny how we have parallel times here. The American government passed a law that nobody could sell Canadian furs to America. Guess what that sounds like? So that kind of put the kibosh on some of the Canadian fur trading and made it real lucrative for the American fur trading company. So it was traveling between Montreal and Mackinac Island by way of Michigan and up and down the coastline there. So that was right up his alley. So he was born in 1802. Willard Wood was born in 1808. He lived in Vermont. And these guys both crossed paths here in Crete. Willard Wood, he studied law, so he was familiar with some of the legalities of setting up communities and just the goings-on of communities. He did that for 4 or 5 years and taught school for a while there. One of his students happened to be named Diantha, ended up marrying her. And so after they were married, and she was a school teacher too after a while, and so they kind of got married and moved this way, took a boat ride on the Erie Canal, I believe, in Lake Erie, got to Detroit, bought a outfit of horses and wagons for $90, and then headed this way. Michigan was kind of a swampy area, and so it was hard to get through there. But anyhow, they made it down through here, and I believe Diantha's last name was Boardman, and she had a brother or an uncle that was in Joliet as an attorney, or had some kind of a role in Joliet. So she, that was probably a connection that they knew somebody in this region that they could come over here. And so they came through, and I think one of the people that was traveling with them went to Blue Island and stayed with and cared for somebody that was ill, and they made their way down to Crete. So, you got to be pretty rugged to be able to do that kind of a move too, because when in 1836, when you get here, there's no other people here other than Hayner. David Hayner was, I think, his name. I'm looking around because he knows the guy's name. David Hayner. He was the one guy that lived here. There was other families that lived. I think the Browns and the McCoys, some of the early settlers around the region here, but they're few and far between. You might see a guy 2 miles away and wave to him and hope he sees you. That's about as close as they had, people-wise. But they have to pick a place to build a house. How do you build a house by yourself? And what kind of house? And it's going to be a log cabin or a hole in the ground. We had a guy that dug a hole in the ground out by the Rennie farm, which is by Route 394 and Exchange Street. He lived in a hole in the ground while he built his house. So by then, when Rennie came along, I think that was in probably 10 years after Willard Wood got here, there was a few other people around here, maybe so they could help out each other and get their homes built and established. But how do you pick a place where to set down roots? If you go stand up by the traffic light uptown, and you stand there and you look around, and that's the highest point. Everything goes downhill a little bit from the intersection there. I did that one day. Just wondered, why would he pick here? But that was the highest spot, and so it's good drainage, and you wouldn't get wet feet in the springtime as likely. Just another point of interest. I think the second highest point above sea level in Illinois is south of Crete, on south of Crete-Money Road. There is kind of the continental divide, if you will. Water runs south of there to the Kankakee River, and north of there it runs to Lake Michigan. So we're kinda well set up in the, above sea level here, but, you know, Lake Michigan's a big watering hole over there, and, so, you know, access to water is important, and so Willard Wood picked where he picked right there. Kind of a sidebar here, my grandfather was born on a farm just east of Cole's store out here, and he was born in 1885, and he could climb up on their windmill and see the backwaters of Lake Michigan. You go down Route 30, when they're doing construction, it's all sand hills over there. There are a lot of them are. I know there was a recent, where that Myers Castle was, I think they, or maybe it was east or west, whichever way, but there was a big side of a hill, it was all sand. So, the backwaters of Lake Michigan came this far up this way. Michigan was like that, there's a lot of water in Michigan, you're from Three Rivers, there's a lot of water over there. Three rivers come together, that's why it's named that.
Right.
A lot of swampy areas around there, so people to try to get through those places and get from point A to point B, you had to follow a trail, which, what was that trail there for? The Indians used it. Sauk Trail was a big thoroughfare, and that's Route 12, it goes through that area down there, so that was the Sauk Trail. Interesting thing about White Pigeon, that's a small town up there, they've got a land office right there, where people used to go and buy government land. And, you know, that must have been really an exciting place to go to see people buying land. I might be getting off the topic here a little bit, but I'm just telling you stuff that I'm thinking about here, because, you know, that's when there was no people here. That was no people here, and to go and have a place where you can buy land and stake your claim somewhere, maybe 50 miles or 100 miles away, you had to get to that land office to stake your claim on your ground. Willard Wood probably had to do the same thing here, and when he was trying to finance his venture here, some guy helped him out with some money, and you know what his interest rate was? 33 1/3%. And he paid it off in 3 years. So, you know, that's how they dealt with stuff back in those days. Land speculators would come in and buy up the ground, and then sell it at a profit to people that wanted to settle there. So, backing up a little bit, back in probably the 1700s and the early 1800s, people were held back by the Appalachian Mountains and the Smoky Mountains. This was the West. This was the West here. Ohio was the West. They didn't think about California out there. They were having trouble getting over the mountains to get out here into the plains. So they got out here and got the land here, and it was like a tidal wave of people once they started coming. And I believe the Indian treaties, I want to say 1834 about, is when the treaties were to have the Indians move to other places. They made out, you know, tracts or contracts with the Indian people, and they had to leave this area. The government paid them, I guess, and that's how that whole tidal wave of people was able to go and get this government land. And still to this day, there's a Bureau of Indian Affairs in Washington that deals with making sure that government contracts with the Indians are executed properly. There's a lot of ongoing contracts that last a long time. So, anyhow, back to Willard Wood and Gurdon Hubbard. Willard Wood came to town here, and he was the first everything. He was the first school teacher, he was the justice of the peace, he was the township supervisor. We just talked earlier today about the township was founded in 1850, 175 years ago. He was the township supervisor a couple times. I'm not gonna tell you all about that, but if you go to the community center, we've got a nice board up there that shows the minutes book from the first 5 pages of that minutes book in 1850, and maybe trickles down a couple more months after that. But you can see how they set up the local government. So anyhow, it was all the prominent people in town that were part of that. So that was 1850. Other townships around here started the same day, or the same date, April 2nd, 1850. So.
I'll wake up to you.
I got to go talk a little louder to him. Oh, Chris has got that'll be good enough.
We need to go get him a different chair.
Yeah, he's too comfy in that
Yeah,
chair.
have one of these metal chairs, Jim, that'll be better.
Look at least he's got his shirt on straight.
Okay, so imagine if you're in one of these early settler shoes, how do you survive in the woods or in the plain? You know, there's trails, rivers, lakes to cross or set up a homestead by. I read a lot of westerns, and you know, these guys would come along, and if they had a horse or whatever their mode of travel was, they'd have to carry a little tin of dry grass and stuff so they could strike and get a fire lit somewhere when they stop for the night. What happens if it's raining? You know, you gotta find a place where hasn't gotten rained on, and find some dry leaves and some dry sticks. I mean, we don't even think about that kind of stuff today because we've got all the conveniences, but when they first came through here, that's what they had to do to find a shelter and get food by hunting and stuff. Early on, there was, you know, all these fur traders, they'd have these routes that they would take through the area here to get their goods from the Indians, if they were getting furs, get the trade goods to them, bring the furs back. So there was a lot of that traffic here, but there was not much of it except for on these paths like the Vincennes Trail. It might have been an old buffalo path or an Indian path. That's how they would find their way through, because they were known paths that had been there probably for centuries, that people figured out a way how to get around, you know, obstacles like swamps and things like that. Talk about swamps, somebody mentioned earlier the Kankakee Everglades of the north, the Kankakee marshland over there. That was a huge place that was a big wildlife thing that people went hunting at after it was settled here, but to get through a marsh like that would be difficult. You'd have to know a way through. So I think there was a crossing by the Kankakee River near Momenser. What was the name of that?
Couts.
Well, Couts is over in Indiana, but down by Momenser there was.
Oh, the
Brown's
upper crossing, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
yeah.
Vincennes, yeah, if you were to,
Yeah.
you know, instead of going towards Grant Park and instead of hooking to the left on, I believe that's 17.
17. Yeah.
Just make that immediate right and you're back on Vincennes.
Yeah,
with the
Vincennes
original
Trail.
name.
It's called Vincennes Trail.
It dead ends before it gets to the river, but you can just imagine it, just keep on headed that direction over the river, and that was the original crossing.
Are you familiar with where the radio towers are down there by Grant Park and where the Vincennes Trail goes south? Just talking about that area, that's Yellowhead Township is Grant Park. That's what it's called. That was a Chief Yellowhead. He was an Indian, Potawatomi Indian, that lived in that area. He kind of ruled the area down there. And if you ever go to where those radio towers are, there's a fence and a nice wooded area there. You walk down that fence line 50 or 100 yards, and there's a big stone out in the field with an engraving on there to Chief Yellowhead. So Gurdon Hubbard and Chief Yellowhead knew of each other going through there. I always thought they were kind of friendly, but that wasn't the case. Chief Yellowhead tried killing Hubbard twice, and he was going to kill him again or try, but somebody killed him prior to that. So I don't know all the ins and outs of that, but there's a lot of history about those early points in time where these guys, you know, there's bandits and you have to deal with other people that you run into. You don't know if you've got a good guy or a bad guy on the other side of your horse, so you got to be careful. Maybe that led to Gurdon Hubbard being called Swift Walker. The Indians called him Swift Walker. I can't think of the name of the Indian name for it, Potawatomi or something like that. And I suppose he could walk pretty fast if Yellowhead was chasing him. and actually, the Indians had some guys that they were going to see if they could keep up with Gurdon Hubbard walking, and they trained. He couldn't keep up with him. 60 miles a day he could walk. You know, and I don't know if he had a horse on top of that, but he would bring droves of cattle or livestock through this way, you know, and probably in more developed years that they were coming through town here, because the township minutes had a resolution in there what animals they would allow in the common ways to go through town and graze maybe, or where you could drive cattle and stuff. That's one of the pages that's on that poster out by the community center. So if you read that, you'll see some of those comments there. But Gurdon Hubbard was swift walker. He, after he got through with, after he turned 16 or 18 or 23, whatever, you know, he was living the life of these voyagers and working pretty hard. I've got a picture of him right here when he was 28. And, he had that picture commissioned and painted him, so he must have been doing pretty good in life to have somebody make a painting or a picture of him. So anyhow, he was involved. He got married to an Indian princess named Watsika, and he had a trading post on the Iroquois River, I believe, somewhere down there by Watsika, and he had a trading post there. So his marriage with Watsika didn't work out, but she ended up marrying the guy from I forget his French guy from Bourbonnais. Yeah, you can think of his name?
It was a Bobby.
That's Jim's relative there. If
I'll
we
think
should
of it.
give a talk on the Bobians
Yeah.
sometime here, that would be an interesting story. So, but anyhow, Gurdon Hubbard was he was a I don't know what do you call it, like a representative or whatever in state government a couple terms down there, maybe in Iroquois County, and he worked to get his friend Abraham Lincoln elected. So he was in with the big crowd there, but he also was a militiaman. He led the militia from Danville to Chicago on 2 different occasions when there was Indian uprisings, and that's 130 miles away. So he would bring the militia up here. First time he ever saw Chicago was in 1818. That's when Illinois became a state, in 1818. And so, first time he saw Chicago, he swam across the Chicago portage, or I don't know if that's the Calumet River there or whatever, but first time he saw Chicago, there was 4.5 houses, a fort, in Pottawatomie Village. That's the first time he saw Chicago. So, just interesting that, you know, he's seeing this area develop, and he had his business down there by Watsika, ended up in Chicago in older years, later years, and he was a big proponent of the I&M Canal building to connect Lake Michigan to the Gulf of Mexico, basically. He pushed for that, and, you know, if you think about all the different politics that we have today, it was the same thing back then. It wasn't a slam dunk deal to get some of these projects done, but he pushed for some of those, and they made it. So when he found Chicago, it was kind of an interesting way that he was in there, and he had his buddy Kinsey happened to be in Chicago. He met in Mackinac. They're about the same age. Kinsey might have been a couple years older than him, so I think there was some family connections there with them. After a while, they became friends. But you know, the tidal wave of people coming from the east into the plains areas there, that had to be an incredible time to see people struggling to make their way, and they came from all over the world. The first people that settled in our area here were English. Lord Wood was English. He came from Vermont. Yeah, English descent.
Yankees, they were called.
Yeah, probably.
No, seriously.
Yeah.
Just read it.
Yep, okay. So they, you know, a lot of different nationalities came, and after a while, the Germans came to Crete, and that's, you know, the speculators sold their land to the next incoming crowd, and some of those people stayed, and some of them sold their property and holdings and improvements that they made on their property to somebody else. They made a buck doing that. A lot of them ended up going out to Minnesota and Nebraska from here, and Iowa. So where is the West? You know, there was a moving line. Ohio is the West. Northwestern University in Chicago, I think that probably had some connotations of being part of the West. Yeah, so,
We didn't go further than the Mississippi River.
that's right, that was about the limit there, so. So, you know, I talked about the speculators and buying land. You know, you had to work hard to get your property developed so you could have a home, and you see a lot of these old farm places here, people would do their work at, and boy, they must have really flourished, because some of these houses were pretty good sized houses, and successful people, they worked. You know, the different settlements that we had around here, and I'm not sure what the nationalities were, but in Crete, we had a few settlements here. We had Beebe's Grove. I think Minoris Beebe was the first settler here, out that way, and that's basically a grove of trees. It's not a spot like an intersection or anything. It's Beebe's Grove is the wooded area east of Crete that kind of swings around. You know, the Beebe Grove Cemetery is out here on Burville and State. Beebe Grove is also out there by Coles and that whole area. Thorn Grove is another area that was up in the Stager area. I'm looking at Ryan because he's got a better head on his shoulders for some of this stuff than I do. But I gotta repeat this story verbatim here
I'm making
in
notes
June,
here.
yeah. I'm sure you are. So it should be an interesting discussion here, so I'm looking for more information from you people here. Thorn Grove, then there was Endor, that's out there where Joe, I think, you used to live in Endor, didn't you? Just kidding, you're not that old. But that's out there by the Clemmy Road Fire Station, that's the Endor area out there. There was Bemis, you know where Bemis Road comes out, it goes to the state line, there was a little settlement called Bemis there. Think any other? Hughesburg, yeah, right there where the racetrack was,
Yeah.
before the racetrack was built, and that was back in the 1800s, I'm sure.
By the 1840s, they were here, I can't remember the exact date.
Okay, so,
And when you're finished, I have a few notes too that I wanna add.
okay, great. So, there were little settlements around, How Creek was the one that developed, who knows, you know, Willard Wood was a planner. He made the layout of the village, submitted it to the county in 1849. Incidentally, Will County was established in 1836, the same year Crete was, that Willard Wood came to Crete. I'm not saying established, but that's.
No,
that's what-
founded is the correct term for that, and then established is when they planted it.
Right, that was 1849. Up until then, it had been called Woods Corners. Yeah, so we've got paperwork that shows Beebe's Grove, things on there. I got a couple things here if I get around to it here. I don't know how long I've been gabbing for, I gotta be careful. Some of the people here that were living here, especially out by Beebe's Grove, we had to deal with the Civil War back in the 1860s. And, I'm sure most of you have seen this, but, we took a copy of the minutes book from the Congregational Church, which is our museum. When that congregation started, it was out there by the coal store in Beebe's Grove. And it says here, I'll read this to you. Believing American slavery to be oppressive and sinful and contrary to the rules of the Bible, resolve that we recommend to our members to do all they consistently can as citizens and Christians to bring about its speedy and peaceful overthrow. This is from the Beebe's Grove Congregational Church, and from their minutes book in 1841. So I'm gonna read that at this teachers summit thing that they got here, so people understand that that far back, people were doing something about what you said earlier, stand up for your fellow man. The rules of the Bible are more, have trump out the, that's probably not a good word to use. Trump the laws of the land. Here's this thing that Phyllis made about the Underground Railroad. It's a little folder that she made. Judy Boehner drew the picture, and Phyllis made up the map on the back here that shows where some of the stops on the Underground Railroad were. So I'm gonna see if I can get a bunch of copies of this, because if you're okay with that, handing it out to this teachers conference?
Yeah.
Okay. Write down in the minutes that Phyllis gave you permission. So, Underground Railroad is a big part of our history, and that's the people that we are here. One of our residents got arrested for harboring slaves, it says right in here, for harboring runaways. Anyhow, Samuel Cushing, and this is the court docket, Ryan and Bob Bruns, I think, you guys found this over in Joliet?
No, I saw that on, the Will County, Research Center Facebook page.
Okay, so, it's got Samuel Cushing listed in here twice, so he must have been hiding two people. He got charged $500 a piece. If he would have been found guilty, but no witness ever showed up, because this was the North, and it was against slavery. So that's, you know, some of this is the personality of the community here in some cases. Not everybody was in agreement with that, but there was a known faction here in Crete that and kind of a conduit of people between here and going west maybe to the Mississippi River that was underground railroad stops all the way through here. I'm gonna show you this here, I'm not sure what the actual size of the paper is, Mike printed these things out here. Put this one here. This is a little bit bigger. Now this is also posted out by the community center. One of these, is pictured out by the community center. This is the Western Citizen newspaper out of Chicago in 1842. So they had printed, newspapers in 1842 around here, and this was an abolitionist newspaper. And down on the side there's three people from Beebe's Grove, not Crete yet, Samuel Cushing, Minoris Beebe, Moses Cook, and there's another guy, I can't read it, it's too hard to read, but, we were looking up that guy's name the other day.
Seymour Thompson?
Yeah, I think that's it. So there's a couple of guys that had their name in this newspaper here, and this newspaper was kind of a group that would have lobbyists go to Springfield to stand up for, the abolition of slavery. So that's part of the group that was here in Crete was involved with this. On the other side of the coin, what was it, the Joliet Signal?
Joliet Signal,
Yeah, there was a newspaper in Joliet that took the exact opposite stance of this, and they were pro-slavery. And so there was a lot of friction between these two groups here, and this Joliet Signal knew who the abolitionist communities were, and they were putting out this word, social media of the day said, if these slaves are all freed, they're gonna send them north, let them send all these people, they knew exactly how many were gonna get sent to Will County. Don't ask me how they found that out, or how they made that up.
Yeah.
But they said, don't send them to, they had a list of towns that were pro-slavery, and then they had a list of towns that were abolitionists. Send all these runaway, or these emancipated people to the communities that are fighting for them. Just typical rhetoric that, you hear a little bit of the same kind of stuff today, so.
And Crete was one of them.
Yeah, send them to Crete.
Don't send them to Manhattan.
Whatever.
I will say they were pro-slavery during the Civil War, because that one article I sent you from like the 1840s was the complete opposite. It's what I gathered from it. It's kind of written such old fashioned, I can't completely understand it, but, and I'm sure it depended on who the author of the article was, too.
Right, if you can read the stuff, it's really interesting to see some of the commentary, and they're talking about people that live out in the east part of the country that are leaders in some of these efforts too, that, not Harriet Tubman, but other people here that are on the lighter complected side of the issue, to your point. So there's, a lot of interesting things that you can find in these old newspapers. That came out of the University of Illinois. I think you found that on their website, Mike, isn't that right? Yeah, cause they've got the archives there, it's all on microfilm, and Mike was able to print that out, and, so that article is hanging in the new community center there too, so. We talked about how people thrived, and, agriculture was a big thing around here. They all had how do you move to a place with no home, no source of food? What do you do? So that's gotta be a big dilemma. How much can you carry? You're gonna run out of food after a while, so you gotta do a lot of hunting and know what's edible out in the fields and the woods and stuff like that, but eventually, you must have some idea from the old country or wherever you came from, how to get a farm going or plant crops so you could sustain your family as you're building everything up here. So the community as a group, by this time there's more people coming around, so you've got other people that you can maybe work with, and one guy might grow one thing and the other guy might grow the other thing, and you get a barter system going there. It's just a fascinating thought to me how people could survive and make do with their life in times like that. We've got everything at a convenience store. They didn't have any of that stuff there, so. Anyhow, that's how communities grew, and, we've got our newsletter here, the Crete Citizen, that was, late 1800s that came out, and we had newspapers. There was a Journal, I think, was the first one. Enterprise was the first newspaper in Crete. It was 1870s, I believe. So, you know, the communities grow, and you attract different tradespeople that have different experiences and knowledge, and that's just a slow process to get enough people to grow and build a community. So, a lot of our history that we got is in that Crete Women's Club 1922 book, where they interviewed some of these old settlers, or they interviewed descendants of those old settlers to see how they got through life and how they ended up here and what they did. So, you know, we got guys that made bricks. Pretty soon we got brick buildings show up. You know, everybody's got their own little knack of what they do and contribute to the good of the community. So,
Blacksmith, John Cole.
yeah, everybody's got their thing.
You ever hear of that disease, agu? Is that how you pronounce it, Chris? Agu?
I'm not certain.
It's a waterborne illness that all these early pioneers got, because if they weren't drinking, water out of the spring, they'd be drinking dirty water out of a puddle, and they all got sick. They were all in bed with the fever and chills, and for most of the year before they got better.
And how many
And that on
doctors?
top of trying to survive with no food, at a store.
You gotta go get food somewhere. You gotta go get fuel to keep warm.
Yeah.
That's tough to do. So, just, you think about the struggles that those people had in those early days. It was second nature to them because they probably grew up in those kind of environments. But, I had some relatives that didn't get heat in their house until, you know, recently, meaning in the last 75 years. You know, that's tough to, but if you grow up that way, it's second hand to you, second nature. So, not second hand, second nature. Anyhow, that's as far as I've got. We just hit 1900. I will say that Willard Wood passed away 30 days short, roughly, of making it into 1900. He died November or something of 1899. We celebrated his 100th anniversary of his death here in 1999. So, yeah, he lived a pretty long life, 1808 to 1899. That's 91 years old. Pretty good lifespan there. Willard Wood, or Gurdon Hubbard, I believe he died in 1884. He was born in 1802. Somewhere along the line, he lost one eye. They had to take an eye out, and then after a while, they had to take another eye. So he was blind at the end, according to Wikipedia, or Wikipedia, whatever. Wikipedia. Yeah. So I imagine some of those things are well known, that they're facts. You know, Gurdon Hubbard lost all his belongings in the Chicago fire. He stuck with it and rebuilt Chicago. So there's a lot of things with his namesake on. There's Hubbard's Cave that you drive through, and what else is there?
Hubbard Trail.
Hubbard Trail Junior High. Well, there's a Hubbard Lane here in Crete.
Yeah.
I know where that came from.
And that's where Hubbard Trail came from too,
Right,
because Vincennes Trail originally, and I don't know the whole story because it's not in front of me, but the Hubbard Trail, it was changed, I think, after he took the soldiers to Fort Dearborn in Chicago. And in honor of him, they changed it to Hubbard Trail. But don't bet on that until you read it somewhere. But that's why I remember it.
Have to read that Swift Walker book. I don't know if that's
I would like
that
to.
question in there or not. Mike's read the book too. I don't remember if it says anything about that.
Yeah, Vincent's Trace and Hubbard Trail are interchangeable. They're the same thing.
Right.
I think it was more like an honorary, if I.
Yes, it was an honorary thing, that's
Because
right.
all the maps and plans say Vincennes, if not Vincennes, it's Vincennes to Chicago. Sometimes Chicago to Vincennes, but since
There's
Vincennes.
Vincennes Street in
Yeah.
Chicago Heights and Blue Island, you know,
Right here.
probably the same road.
It is.
Yeah, the one that, St. James Hospital, there's a Vincennes on the north and south, and it would have bisect that building in half. When I overlaid the 1834 plat, it lined right up with that, so that's the original.
Yeah.
road. Just a little to the east of the
I don't know if it's still there, Ryan, but if you go, there's a forest preserve, you know where Route 1 cuts off? By Bloom High School.
Yeah.
If you're on Route 1, and then they call it the Route 1 cutoff, it goes to where Marnell's used to be.
Right, it goes to the east.
There's a triangular piece there that's all woods. If you go out in the middle of that woods, there's a bridge that's in line with Vincennes that goes over the creek.
Is it an old bridge?
Yeah, it's an old bridge, so. So that, I believe you're right, that was the old Vincent's Trace Harbor Trail, whatever you want to call
Well, it's been since like Ryan said, after I think he sent the military to rescue Fort Dearborn, it became known as Hubbard's Trail. But that's all I can remember. So, would you like some more things added to what you said, or?
I'm just gonna say that if Gordon Hubbard went to Chicago in October or November, he had to swim across that Calumet River.
Calumet River.
Do you know what a calumet is?
Yes, it is.
The peace pipe. It looks like a peace pipe. I just didn't know if you knew that or not, but that's just one little tidbit there. But, anyhow, this presentation here, I'm gonna give to Governor State, and if I can hand out some of this stuff here that relates to the early times of people coming right here in this region, that's what I wanna do. So however the teachers take it and manipulate it to suit their grade level or whatever, you know, it's interesting stories, you know, who knew that the guy had to carry a tin of tinder, dry stuff, dry grass and stuff, to light a fire so he could stay warm? And who would even think about that? But that's what they had to do.
Do
Anyhow.
you have a picture of Willard Woods?
Oh, yeah. Yeah,
Willard Woods what?
First home.
No,
Oh,
the
first
log
home?
cabin.
No.
Oh, that's where.
Yeah, here's Willard Wood, here's small, it's not, doesn't do him justice, but, we've got some bigger pictures of him here, so.
And Hubbard, he never actually lived in Creek, did he?
No,
No.
not, well, Ryan said he bought some property in Thornton, there's too many rocks there, so he didn't like it. He missed the boat there.
No, he probably bought it because he knew the rock.
He bought it, yeah, he bought property at Thornton Quarry and then sold
Oh,
it.
okay.
So he knew that the mineral rights were.
Oh, he was probably taking the tollway, and so all